in terms of Penrose, I think most people have dismissed him and his ideas on consciousness. I think that, I read his books while I was in prison. He's obviously a brilliant guy, but I think, sometimes brilliant people want to stand out and they contrive theories to, that sort of tie themselves in knots. I try not to do that. I'm not as brilliant as Roger Penrose, but I think that when you have spent your life studying the most complicated things, which I'm trying to do, you end up feeling this anxiety, some people at least, and this hole where you want to explain everything, and you want to tie it all together in a bow. And the problem is there's no great way to do that. Some people can do it with relativity or something like that, and those are the real leaps forward. But this pressure to tie it all together and come out with this amazing, new theory gives rise to a lot of crap. And I think that's sort of where Penrose comes out. I think people have tried to apply Gödel's incompleteness theorem to virtually everything, and it ends up not being spot on. It's probably inapt or inapropos or whatever, apposite to kind of like try to shoehorn some of these things together. For example, there was a guy that claimed he solved Riemann's hypothesis a while back, and he was like making this just gigantic leap across fields, and everyone discarded his theory as irrelevant. But he made this big announcement. He had this press conference set up, and it would have been very big news, probably the biggest since Fermat's last theorem. But it was not to be. Nobody believed him, and I think that nobody felt that his proof was real. And that's kind of the funny thing about math is like, some proofs stand out and you agree, and some proofs you say, well, I'm not convinced. And the actual judgment of whether a proof is convincing or not is actually sometimes more subjective than obvious. And some people feel like, oh yeah, that's a valid proof. Or some people say, yeah, it's not quite, I think, convincing enough. And it's not as simple as just deducing it line by line, like the Pythagorean theorem or something. So, the point I'm making is like, if you look at Gödel's incompleteness theorem, it's been applied to virtually everything. And the book Gödel, Escher, Bach kind of did, I think, a bit of a disservice to like what is a fairly narrow, kind of idea that has very important implications in complexity. It has very important implications in meta-mathematics. And I think Hofstadter, honestly, is one of the great intellectual frauds. And I know a lot of people feel like Gödel, Escher, Bach was this like life-changing book that, was like so important and so, like insightful and things like that. But I view it as like a very amateurish attempt to like lateralize knowledge unnecessarily. And if you know the creative writing parts of that book, like they're very, to me, like sophomoric and like very limited, like the whole a tortoise and Achilles thing. Like the guy is just like in love with himself to the extent that like he's in love with his knowledge and wants to make all these allusions and kind of like metaphors and references to like other esoteric knowledges like Quine and other important like pieces of intellectual history and scholastic history. But like, it's cool to know all that stuff, but I don't think it's cool to try to wring more out of it than exists, especially in a self-congratulatory kind of like non-Socratic way where the guy's like, delivered Gödel, Escher, Bach in what felt like a metaphorical like gold box with like trumpets, heralding its arrival. And I just, that book and like the whole Penrose, like, to me is almost like a continuation of it, a little more erudite, but still, not, actually impressive.
People love to make claims about how, general agents can't exist, but if you accept that a human is a general agent, well then, like, clearly you've made a false claim somewhere. Right? Or you don't believe that humans are general agents, in which case, like, what is your definition of general agent, and, like, what does it mean to say AGI?
I'm confused what you mean when you say that humans have agency, whereas AI does not, because it's very, very commonly accepted among neuroscientists that your brain is unconsciously aware of every decision you ever make before it's conscious of it. Or if you're talking about making decisions based on your wants, like this, human brains chase after monoaminergic reactions. So like in regards to you saying that you think that I'm beautiful, so you want to talk to me. Very simply, this is because your brain releases dopamine when you look at me, because your brain has determined me as
I'm a sicko.
Beautiful. Or like in Novus's case, you want to talk to him because you find him intelligent. This is also a dopaminergic reaction. action. It's like very simply, whereas like AI does not have that, what I would consider a drawback.
I mean, I would just say that we have these circuits. Like there was this big circuit, kind of wave for neuroscience that took over, where you had like projections, right? Like limbic projections from this area to that area of nucleus accumbens to whatever, all the alphabet soup of brain areas. And like the problem with LLMs is there's no live circuit, right? It's like a dead circuit. The weights aren't innately alive, right? There's, like you said, like there's this constant subjective processing of information and the flow of monoamines and other, sort of chemical soup that's happening in our brains, including electricity, action potentials, all kinds of things like that. That, the LLM's just a list. It's literally a list of weights. That's all it is. And,
How is that different? Or how is the human brain more complicated than that? Like
well,
if you dumb down the human brain very simply, we just all want dopamine. Like even if...
Well, a number of other things too, but yeah.
If you're trying to solve a problem, let's say, and you have to cut off your arm to solve that problem, but it's like very essential for you to do so. Like in most cases, if you can get away with not solving that problem, you won't, because you want to avoid cutting your arm off. Whereas like an AI wouldn't have a problem with that.
What you're describing is intrinsic motivation, right? Like the whole dopaminergic system or whatever is just, sub-goal generation for the human agent, right? Because if you think about
it determines every single decision you ever make in your life.
Yeah, but...
Which is why humans are so faulty. We don't get what we want all the time. You see people...
Well, without dopamine, we wouldn't do anything at all, right? So we do need some...
Yeah. We wouldn't be able to survive. Like the only point of these systems is for us to keep surviving. AI doesn't have that drawback.
All right, so...
This is why I'm confused by you saying that humans are... have agency. Like I very heavily disagree with that.
Broadly speaking, the purpose of this intrinsic motivation is to provide some sort of dense global reward in the absence of dense global reward, right? All living beings are optimized for this global fitness function, blah blah blah, whatever. That's pretty sparse, right? Like how often do you get to reproduce in your lifetime? Not very often, and so that's why you have these sort of intrinsic short-term goals, right? This sort of it pops out of my head, I want to do X, Y, Z, maybe look at somebody, talk to somebody, blah, 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 whatever. Right? There's nothing stopping an AI system from developing these totally on their own, right? I mean, there is no creation that came down from on high and installed these in our brains. But if you look at a lot of the RL literature, they do a lot of intrinsic motivation for things like exploration, right? With the hope here that encouraging these agents implicitly to want to explore more will allow them to find better quality policies and thus actually be able to solve the higher level task better.
Kind of like slime mold.
Yeah, and so I don't think it's at all unreasonable to say, oh, well, these are clearly mechanisms that are necessary for solving long horizon planning problems, and it's both desirable for our system to have it and try to engineer them ourselves. So Dr. Critic, this is in the form of trying to maximize your policy entropy. And you can go down the list in terms of what exactly the intrinsic motivation is for these various RL agents, but all of them have this thing, and it's because it's effective in practice.
Okay, I feel like I don't know if I'm being gaslit or I'm just stupid, but my question is not being answered. How does the human brain have agency?
Well, I mean, I think it's a semantics thing to some extent, because if it goes back to old free will arguments. But I think that, the easiest difference for me, at least, and this works for me, it doesn't have to work for everyone, and you can disagree. But again, the human brain is an integrated machine that, as you say yourself, there's dopamine receptors, there's dopamine itself, there's other neurotransmitters that are as or maybe even more important depending on the situation, and their expression systems and their expression patterns in different parts of the brain, and all kinds of things like that. All those are interconnected to form an organism that can think, that can create, that can plan, that can execute the plan, etc. The LLM is a large array of numbers, and it can't do any of those things. The only thing you could do is write a program that calculates, the weights against a attention head and all this other stuff, and you spit out what the next token is, and that is not agency. That is a calculation. That is like looking up a word in a dictionary. It is an algorithm. It is nothing even close to kind of this integrated system that has all these different sort of crosstalks. LLM is, we make it look like it's something cool, but the reality is it's a long array to predict another token, and that ain't much. And that's.
So what you're saying is that the human mind has the agency to make the wrong decision. Is that?
Sure. Just look at our lives.
I mean, humans are capable of doing wrong for right planning, right?
I don't get the point of that. So you're when you say what humans have the AI doesn't is they have agency. All you're talking about is they can make the wrong decision.
Right. That's a cynical view. They can make the right decision. They could paint the Mona Lisa. They could write the Brandenburg Concerto. They could also.
Can the human brain? Can you decide right now to get out some oil paints and paint the Mona Lisa exactly as it is?
I can try to write a new song, especially.
You can try, but can you? Do you have the agency to do it? Do you have the agency to decide to paint the Mona Lisa exactly as it is?
I can decide to become a musician.
Free will doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think it's a different question, right? I mean.
Yeah, I think you're using the term agency in a very unusual way here. Right?
Well, we're either talking about free will or we're talking about the human mind as it is making decision.
Let's say if you are just a feedback loop of different a collection of different feedback loops that are calibrated based on our dopaminergic circuits in the brain and all this stuff, but we need to consider that we can override these networks most of the time. There is something more, an emergent property that we can't quite grasp it yet. I mean, I believe you have a neurology background. I believe you know Eric Kandel, that he extensively talked about this, that we don't really exactly know what consciousness is, but we are positive that we are more than just some positive and negative feedback loops in the human brain. There is something more. For instance, you see some monks who go to who basically completely override their let's say their will to reproduce through let's say discipline and let's say the conscious deliberation and conscious deprivation of their senses, because they consciously determine that this is not productive. So I'm just thinking that there is something that we don't quite understand.
I'm not sure the human brain can just decide to not output what the input is.
And that's my point, is that it's a machine. The machine has inputs, outputs, functions that map inputs to outputs, and that's all well and good. LLM doesn't have any of that. It's really just it's got one function that can answer a question, and it feels really important that it can do that. But the LLM can't come up with an idea without a prompt, right?
So are you not scared of AI? Do you think there's any point where you might be?
Yeah, so that's the whole EAC question, right? So I think the whole idea of EAC is that no, we're not scared of AI. We want to accelerate AI. That this is technology that's going to bring great things, just as all technologies have, and that it'd be irresponsible, if anything, to try to slow it down. So that's the general thesis of EAC, and we've gotten a lot of powerful allies. Over the last year, that this loose, it's not an organization exactly, but this idea has sort of started, and it's exciting. I think that the enemies of EAC are, unfortunately, seemingly Elon Musk and a handful of other folks that are starting to question whether or not we should slow down AI. But no, I think there could be some scenario where I'd be scared of AI, but I don't think a hypothetical fear is I'm likely to suffer from that anytime soon, because I know this technology and I know what it's capable of, and at the moment, just to close the loop with Zintani, is these machines need prompts, right, from us, the same way a calculator needs a prompt from you, and we would never confuse a calculator from having agency. A calculator sits there and it waits for your prompt. You give it the prompt, it gives you an answer. That's it.
Okay, but what if you give it the prompt to teach itself?
Well, AI LLMs can't do that yet without extra appendages. And when we add those appendages, a lot goes wrong because we don't seem to have the skill to actually get it to do what we want. Otherwise, we'd have computers running around, doing things right now. We're not there yet. The nightmare for some people is that that'll happen. The dream for some people is that'll happen. I think that the agency part is the part that's missing, right? It's a really good calculator, but who's going to push the buttons? Who's going to decide what happens when the buttons are pushed and we have the answer? How do we take that answer and push more buttons with that? It's really hard. I've tried day in and day out for the last several months trying to make some progress, and it's not easy at all to sort of get these machines to be human or act human. I wish that they were easier to work with, but I think my analogy is closer to the truth than kind of like this mythologized. There's all kinds of funny memes that are happening in this community. But if you just get down to practical kind of reality and trying to make software and make a product and make something useful, you realize that these are really limited technologies, as amazing as they are. And you can do a lot with them, but you can only do so much with them too. And it's funny how normalized for some people, like, I don't know, for me, example, how normalized this has become. Like the first time you use GPT, it's like looking into a parallel universe. But after working with this thing every day for the last 3 months, it's very mundane now. Like it gives you this answer, and you call on this oracle. It's basically an oracle in a way, both in the computer science sense and also in the metaphorical sense. You call on this oracle, it gives you this answer. You don't know what's happening in the oracle that well. Kind of generally and mathematically, but you don't really know what's going to happen. The oracle gives you this answer. Sometimes you're surprised, sometimes you're not, sometimes you're impressed, sometimes you're disappointed. But that's all it is. It's an API, and I think to deride it a little bit is probably a little bit the duty of EAC to sort of look at these things and say, wait a second, let's help teach everybody what is this exactly. And I think the analogy of a calculator, this API needs a call and it needs a prompt. And that prompt is, whatever you want. And the output will be based on your prompt, but there's also entropy too, right? You can make these things entirely deterministic. By putting the entropy at 0, you can make them pretty stochastic by putting the entropy at 100 or 1.0. And depending on how you adjust those settings, you'll get an answer. So to me, it's nothing more than a multivariable function.
I don't understand how you don't see the danger. What if the prompt is figure out how to get rid of the U.S.? Figure out how to kill everyone in the U.S.? What if that's the prompt?
Well, some people are crazy and they wake up tomorrow morning and they'll actually have the same thought, and they'll be stopped by the social framework we have with police and with things like that.
You can get banned from ChatGPT for asking about bombs.
Yeah, ChatGPT will ban you. AWS can ban you. And then, of course, the second you try to buy ammonium nitrate or whatever the heck that you think you can use to detonate something, that person will say, well, why are you buying this? Why are you buying 1,000 pounds of this fertilizer? And, what farm are you from? And that person will be arrested. I mean, there's no special, exception for machines. Machines break the law, then, a person using a machine breaks the law. I mean, when Al-Qaeda plans a terrorist attack with WhatsApp, does WhatsApp have agency? No, of course not. Yes, this tool is important. It's going to add a lot of efficiency to our lives, but it's not going to, really, cause an existential threat. It's going to reshape society, which is probably what we're more scared of than anything else. I think we're defaulting. We sort of anchor on the reshaping of society, and we blame shift to destroy all humans. And I think that that the reality is we're probably scared about, all the changes that are coming, and it is scary. Change is scary. Uncertainty is scary. We don't know what the world will look like in 2040, and probably because of LLMs, it's going to look a lot different, and other technologies too. But it's going to look really, really different, and that's scary. I mean, I like the world the way it is too, but we have to embrace change and take a bold step forward and see what happens. But to go to the slippery slope of this is going to destroy all humans, I think it's probably too much of a Ludditism and fear mongering, and it's important technology, but it's not that important. I mean, it's up there. It's more important than blockchain, but it's not like this is opening up the dark side of like a film, The Stranger Things, where we're going to open up the what do they call it, the Upside Down, and there's going to be Cthulhu who comes out and going to kill us all. This is that's just too that's begging that's asking too much. I think that it's just an API. There was a point in time when PHP or PGP, excuse me, PGP was declared a military weapon and was banned. So the government tried to ban encryption. And one of the things I really hate about the government's approach to crypto is there's some people in government like Elizabeth Warren that want to make it so that you can't have a private and public key, which are really just two large numbers. They look like letters, but that's because it's base 58. In base 10, they're just big numbers, and they're basically saying you can't have these two big numbers. These two big numbers, when you put them on an elliptic curve, they're related, and that's too much for us. And of course those big numbers represent more than just two numbers, but this idea that like you can stop somebody from having two numbers written down, right? I couldn't laugh harder at something. Yes, Miss Warren, I have these two numbers, and I'm going to give them to you first before. She actually said that all private public key pairs should be registered in the government, and it's it's really you can't help but laugh. It's probably easier to hurt AGI or AI because you do sort of need these NVIDIA machines, and over time there'll be other ways to do this, and even with NVIDIA chips. In cloud and stuff like that, there seems to be a lot of choke points here. And government likes choke points, right? So